Good, good. All right, so we have started recording, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. If anybody has any questions about anything, please let me know. It says host disabled.
Yeah, I'm watching.
Okay. So we're working on sharing a screen. For those of you who haven't met, I think I've met most of you. I'm Nick Lovelace. I am the managing attorney here at NIP Law Office for our Concord and Kannapolis offices. I'm also a partner with the firm. And I am very excited to be able to present this for you today. I mean, it's one of those that I try and do every so often, just going through, and Melissa said that we had some requests to do this. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to go through kind of how to read, number one, your standard closing disclosures, your Alta settlement statement, both seller and buyer closing disclosures. So, because ultimately it's important for everybody who, if you're practicing real estate on a regular basis or an irregular basis, to be able to see this document, be able to answer questions that your clients may have about the document, because invariably there's always some question that someone's going to come up with. They're going to ask something that you're like, I have no clue. If you have no clue, number one, don't try to answer it. You've got professionals that are working with you. You've got attorneys. You've got lenders who have prepared these documents, who will better understand these documents and you can explain them. However, you also want to make sure that you can answer the basics so people can look at you and kind of look like you know what you're doing, because that's an important feature of, I mean, you're in the profession, you want to be able to at least give some sort of rough indication of, okay, this is what this says. And I know a lot of you are seasoned and are able to do that, but you might learn something today. Most folks tell me I always learn something I didn't know in one of these presentations. So hopefully I'm able to give that to you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And usually I do a PowerPoint. I'm not doing a PowerPoint for this one because we are going to be focusing on 3 documents today. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It is everybody on the Zoom call should all be able to see the Alta settlement statement on the screen. Let me get a thumbs if you see that on your screen now. Okay, cool.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Perfect. So should be set. And so I'm going to go ahead and start. So basically this first document I'm going to go through, if you've ever done a closing with me, you will know that this is the document that I go through first. I always go through the Alta settlement statement first. And so the reason I go through this first is because I personally think it's a more user-friendly document. This is the document that our office uses to disperse our funds. So this is the document that we will use in order to evaluate the credits and debits on the transaction. And this is the document that we use to send money out. The seller CD and buyer CD were both basically imposed by the government after the crash in 2008, when people just said, we don't understand anything about how we bought this house. They're giving loans to anyone and everyone out there, but those loans, people said, we're pretty much misled as to about what the interest meant. People didn't really want to be adults and understand how financing worked, and it was a lot easier for those who worked with the HUD settlement statement. For folk, it was apparently not user-friendly enough. So the government said, nope, now anything that is regulated by TRID, that is government regulated, a lender that is going to give you a conventional loan or a government-backed loan, is going to use that closing disclosure. Now, if you work with investors, if you handle cash deals, a lot of the times, if your clients are getting a hard money loan, you're generally only going to see this Alta settlement statement on your screen. But if you're working with a traditional lender who's doing conventional or something government-backed, you're generally going to see both this Alta settlement statement as well as the closing disclosure. Now, this Alta settlement statement is prepared by our office. The lender does not touch this document. We prepare this document, so if you see it, if you're having a cash transaction, you'll get this from us, which will outline all of the numbers on the transaction. If you're waiting for a closing disclosure. We'll prepare your seller closing disclosure. We'll send that seller closing disclosure out. We do not prepare the buyer's closing disclosure. That's prepared by the lender. We get asked all the time, where's the CD? Where's the CD? Where's the CD? My clients are looking for the CD. We do not have the CD. We do not prepare the CD. The CD is prepared by the lender. We're actually not authorized to share our preliminary closing disclosures because they are preliminary numbers. The only closing disclosure that should be shared is going to be shared by the buyer's lender. So you're asking for a CD, we can tell you, hey, we're still working on it, or we can say, hey, we balanced, and the lender should be sending that to you momentarily. So that's the way it works. So going through this Alta, does anybody have any questions about that? Kind of the basics of that. All right, so on this one, I'm presenting an Alta. All three of these documents are going to be for the same transaction, and this is a standard lender finance transaction with a conventional loan. So use that to that's going to be kind of the basis of this particular presentation. So first, what we try to do is we have our office, we list where the closing is taking place. A lot of times like if we're doing a mail away closing or something like that, we generally will list the office just our main office in Cornelius, or the office where the closing paralegal is based. So when we were doing closings here and it was a mail away closing, then Lisette was handling the file, then we would put 119 West Avenue just because that's where we're at. So that listed, got the date that it was prepared, nothing really exciting about that. We'll have our file number. You'll see I have redacted some of the information. I don't necessarily want clients' personal information to get out on the screen. So you'll see those black bars. That's just client names. So it's not readily apparent. Okay, these are these folks. I just want to keep some semblance of privacy for these folks whose information I am using. So, but there's nothing private on here, no social security numbers, anything like that. So I'm not presenting anything like that, but just be cautious, So it's got the property address listed here, and then you'll have the buyer's name and the seller's name. If you get this document, just make sure to review the document to make sure that the buyer's name, and you have the buyer's name, if you have the seller's, your seller's name is spelled correct. Every once in a while, we do have a typo. That does happen every once in a while. It's just, especially if something is written by hand as opposed to typed in, we will misinterpret a letter of somebody's name. If somebody has a non-traditional spelling of their name, a lot of times you've got thrown off something like people have Jonathan, but instead of Jon, they'll say John. Sometimes someone gets tripped up by that. And so if that's incorrect, a lot of times if it's just incorrect on our end, it's easily fixable. If it's incorrect on the closing disclosure, that has to be reissued by the lender. We can't fix that. So especially if you're on a buyer side, make sure that you've got correct spelling of folks' names. And then got your address for the sellers and buyers. You've also got your lender listed there as well. And then you've got your settlement date and your disbursement date listed. Now, typically speaking, so your settlement date, what settlement is the date on which the signing actually happens. Typically speaking, your settlement date and your disbursement date are going to be the same thing. That's not always the case, especially when you're doing a mail away transaction. Your settlement date could be May 2nd, but your disbursement date would be May 3rd. And the reason for that is if we're doing a mail away, we can't record anything until we have the original documents to submit to the lender. So if we know that the clients are signing from wherever they're at on May 2nd, but we're not going to receive original copies of the documents till May 3rd, then that's what's going to say May 2nd and then May 3rd. Now, the reason that's important is because if you are scheduling a mail away transaction, you need to explain to your clients that if your closing date, your settlement date is May 2nd, and you'll notice on the contract, you're not writing date of closing on it, you're writing date of settlement. So if your closing date that the lender has is May 2nd, but you're doing a mail away closing, the deed will not record until the following day on May 3rd. So just make sure that you pay attention to those dates as well, especially if your client's doing a mail away. And if they're doing a mail away, they're probably going to rely on you a little bit more because they're not going to be sitting in front of an attorney. They're likely going to ask you to go through a document like this in order to be able to explain it to them. We've had sellers in the past that were upset with us, upset with their agents, because it wasn't explained to them that, oh, it's not going to record to the next day because the buyer's doing a mail away transaction. So make sure if you know that the buyer's doing a mail away transaction, you should, and our paralegal will certainly let you know that you explain to your sellers, by the way, it's not recording till the next day, so you're not getting your money till the next day. It'll still be your house that's for that day, but that money's going to come across the next day. So just make sure you can explain that to your sellers so they don't end up having any sort of levels of irritation at you. So I'm going to start by going down the left side of this document. And so you've got on the left side is where the sellers are at. People always get thrown off by the debits, credits when they're seeing this for the first time. And what I try to remember for myself and what I try to remind other folks that we're working with, while we see these all the time, we're comfortable with these documents. Most clients, this is the only time they're going to see this. First time home buyers, the first time they're seeing it. Other home buyers, second time, third time, maybe the first time they've seen this document in 10 years. If they bought a house before 2012, they've probably never seen this document before because they're used to working off the HUD. So it is a document that you want to make sure that you have some level of comprehension on so you can understand it. So right here, you've got your sales price on the seller side, $475. Make sure that's accurate. Especially if you've had a recent addendum to the contract changing purchase price. Your due diligence, obviously, this was back in the era where due diligences were well inflated, although this is a nice due diligence deposit transaction anyway. So make sure, obviously, those numbers are accurate. And if your seller is giving a credit, then that's going to be listed there as well. And this was in 2022 when credits were starting to come back in. Now we see a lot of them. But one thing, if you do know that there's a credit and you don't see one here, make sure you reach out to us and let us know, hey, where's the credit? Because there have been transactions where buyers sign an addendum, sellers sign an addendum to modify the purchase price. A lot of times that will get sent to the lender and there's some assumptions and some confusion. Who's sending that to the attorney? If we don't get it, we don't know that. Even if the lender has it, they don't always share that credit with us. So make sure any addendum that you do that changes anything about the contract, and really that's what the addendum is designed to do. If you have any question, I'd rather get 5 copies of an amendment than get no copies of it. So if you are related to the transaction and you've agreed to amend the contract, please send it. I'd much rather get more than not get it. And then you've got your HOA entrance assessment. So that's just HOA dues, and HOA dues are always prorated. So that's contractual. They're prorated as of the date of closing. And so this was an annual HOA, so it was prorated for the whole year. There are going to be circumstances, and I don't think this is one of them, but there are going to be circumstances in which your seller has not paid their HOA dues for the month. If that's the case, because people will say, wait, why am I receiving a proration? I didn't pay this yet. Well, we'll charge them whatever, because when we send in, we'll charge them that whatever the period is. Some HOAs are monthly, some HOAs are quarterly, some HOAs are biannual, some HOAs are annually. So it just depends on what that period is. Now, so we'll charge whatever is outstanding and then prorate that amount back to them. So they'll be made whole for sure. And they'll pay what they're supposed to pay, because we do order a resale statement from the HOA management company. That resale statement is going to designate who owes what, how much the fee is for HOAs. I'm not going to get into my diatribe on Cedar management because they're the worst, but I do want to, but you're just going to want to make sure you pay attention to anything HOA related to make sure that's county taxes. Yes, Mike.
Has there been any official word on like the HOAs charging a transfer fee and paying that now? I know at one time it was the buyers.
So contractually speaking, now it is a seller fee. Anything related to transferring the HOA from to certification fee, you hear it called, resale fee, documentation fee, any of that, that's all chargeable to the seller. The contract has been modified and tinkered with over, I believe it was 2013, 2014 is when it flipped, from not being a buyer paid fee to a seller paid fee. Now we've had some issues with Cedar Management, among other companies, saying that, well, there's this extra $200 fee that they charge. We actually emailed the folks who drafted the contract, and we've confirmed that is intended to still be a seller paid fee. So Cedar Management double charges sellers on, and that's why I get frustrated with them. That's as far as I'm going with that. But they double charge sellers $200, and there's a statutory maximum of $200 that you're supposed to be paying. They know no one's gonna challenge them over $200, so they're just gonna keep collecting it until. But county tax proration, same thing. The county tax bill for the year is prorated as of the date of closing. Now, the thing about the county tax bill, if we have not received the bill yet, or the bill has not come out, because I'm sure you know, the bill comes out in the middle of the year. Generally speaking, it's going to come out in July or August for most counties. When it comes out, at that point, we have to pay the bill. So we pay the bill at closing, and then we prorate it between, if we pay the bill, then the buyer gives the seller money. In this case, the bill's not been paid yet. So we have to base the bill on the previous year's assessment. So in this case, the seller gives the buyer credit for what that bill is going to be. This oftentimes can become a little bit of an issue with new construction. And the reason for that is because the county hasn't come out and assessed a new construction yet. So if they haven't assessed a new construction, the only thing we have to go off of is the tax bill for the previous year, which is generally going to be on the vacant land. So because of that, the proration is going to be a lot smaller than what the bill may end up being. And so if that's the case, we try and build it into the escrow. Once we talk about the escrow on the buyer's side, we try to build that in so their escrows aren't incredibly short. But with the tax proration, the only thing we have to go off is that, because we don't know what the county is going to come in and value the property. We don't want to value it at the full purchase price, because generally speaking, the purchase price is going to far exceed what the tax value is. That's a pretty standard deal. But so we do have a provision in our tax proration agreement that if there's a difference of more than 10% between what's prorated, then the buyer does have the right to go and discuss that with the seller and see if they're willing to reimburse them. Seller can do that. They probably won't, but they can, especially if you're dealing with a builder. They're very unlikely. But there is a provision that lets them know, hey, it might change. And so you can ask them for it, but ultimately we can't require that they pay. Any questions about anything I just went over on this first page? All right, so I'm gonna keep down works better. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna skip down because we're working on the left side, and that is the seller side. So this is basically the middle to bottom of the second page. And so this is just our fees. We got our administrative fee here. In this case, there were two HOA payoffs two loan payoffs plus an HOA payoff. We do charge $30 per payoff there. So that's where the admin fee comes from. Your document preparation fee is standard set at $375, but it's still that. And then you've got your two agent commissions listed under there. Make sure you review your commission. Make sure it's right. I know a lot of folks go straight to page 2. That does happen. It's okay. I don't judge. So make sure you go and make sure your commission's accurate. What I tell our folks to do is if we have not received any notice from you as agents on your commission, we're generally going to assume it's 3%. These days, that is not a safe assumption, and I understand that, but we would rather over collect on the commission, and that way we can reimburse the client once that's corrected. If they don't see a commission on there, the client's not going to be like, oh, put my agent's commission, put the buyer's agent's commission on there. They're not going to say that. So instead, we'd rather over collect it and let the clients come back to us to correct that for them and make it accurate. So that's why we'll put that 3%. So, but that can all be avoided if we know what your commission is up. So that's why we send out agent info sheets. So if you just make sure you send that agent info sheet back to us with that commission amount on there, so we can put the correct commission and there's no frustration. And then transfer tax, that is another payment that is attributable to the seller. Deed stamps, excise tax, transfer tax, it's all the same thing. That's $2 per thousand on the transaction. That gets paid to the county for tax to sell your house. And that's just, they gotta keep the roads cared for somehow. They gotta keep the schools built somehow, so that's all part of it. So that's the excise tax. There's not much we can do about it. And that's again, per the contract, the seller paid fee. And it's actually statutory that it's also it's the responsibility to transfer or to pay. So that's where that's from. Not much we can do. All right, and this third page is going to have your loan payoffs. And so you've got your loan payoffs here, both the F&M. You probably had an equity line or a second mortgage on the property. Sometimes typically you've only got one payoff. And then again, they must have already had their HOAs paid because we didn't have to pay their HOA on the seller side. And if we're in the point where taxes are due, then we'll pay the taxes on the left side as well. So basically that takes you to this nice little subtotal area, which people sometimes will get frustrated with us about. Wait, why does this say 475,000? Why does this say 313? So what this subtotal is just the total of everything on the right. And all that is the purchase price in addition to the HOA, because that's everything that's coming to the seller. Then the subtotal on the left, the debit amount, is all those fees that I just went through. And then the 161,820.26 is literally just say, hey, take that subtotal of credit, subtract the subtotal of debit. That's what gives you that 161,820.26. It's pretty straightforward, but you get a lot of questions on that. I got a question the other day, and we get it more on the buyer side when we get to their subtotals, but that's just because it's not exact. It's a little further from that purchase price. So if does anybody have any questions on that seller side of the Alta? Pretty straightforward. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and page up back to the top of the Alta, and we're going to go down the right side, going down the buyer side now. So again, same thing. You've got your purchase price of $475, and then it credits back the deposit. We have gotten questions before. I've gotten in an argument with a client before as to why on the buyer side it shows $25,000 of deposit, but it doesn't show any receipt on the seller side. The reason for that is because the seller hasn't received that deposit. The seller had received the deposit. It was on that side, it would lower their proceeds by $25,000. In the case I'm talking about before, it was $1,000. She just couldn't comprehend that she was like, but why don't I get that? I was like, you are getting it. You get it at closing. But it was fun. And then the loan amount, $275, that's just determined by the lender. We put that on there as a credit because they're signing for that note at closing. And then due diligence, same thing, seller credit. Same thing, make sure you're checking if that's there. And then with the prorations, the buyer's just going to be on the other side of the HOA proration, be on the other side of the tax proration. Then you get into your loan charges, and those have nothing to do with me. So those are all determined by the lender. Got your point pay downs, application fee, all the fun loan charges. You may get questions on what these mean. Honestly, if I'm getting a question on what a loan charge means, I'm referring them back to their loan officer. Let their loan officer answer these questions. That's why they're getting it. So if there are any questions about any of these fees or anything like that, just refer them back to your loan officer, to their loan officer. Now the prepaid interest, I do always explain, because people do like, hey, what is that? So when you're paying mortgages, you always are you're paying those in arrears. So you're paying for the month that you just completed. So in this case, your client's closing on May 6th, but they're paying interest from May 6th to June 1st. So they're covering the interest for the month that they're currently in the home, because they're not going to make a principal payment until July to cover both the principal and interest from June. But they only have to pay interest. So that's that free month that people talk about. So in this case, they're in good shape because they've paid interest from May 2nd to June 1st. So that means that their first loan payment's not going to be until July 1st, which is nice. Now, the only time you're not going to see this line is if somebody's closing on the first of the month. If somebody's closing on the first of the month, you won't see that. And if you don't see that there, that's going to mean that they are basically paying that next month's payment. So if they close on February 1st, they're paying they're paying on March 1st. So if you don't see that, you can explain that to them. That's what that is. Electronic recording fee, we record everything we do electronically, makes it easier for clients, but there is a minor cost to that. So it's $5 per document. So that's where that comes from. If you ever get any questions about that, impound section, that establishes an escrow. So your escrow account, 90% of your buyers who are getting traditional loans are going to have that. And that just establishes the number of months that you're paying in order to establish the homeowner's escrow, the number of months you're paying to establish the property tax escrow. So when I explain, people ask me, why are they collecting so many months of escrow for taxes? The closer you are to the tax bill for that year coming out, the more months of taxes your lender is going to collect. So if you're closing in, let's say, September, well, the tax bill's out. Taxes are going to be paid at close. In all likelihood, they're only going to need to collect about 3 or 4 taxes to make sure that escrow account is full by the time it comes around next year. For this case, it was closing in May. So tax bill is going to come out in about 3 or 4 months. So they need to have enough in that escrow account so the buyer's not going to have a substantial shortage by the time tax time or by the time that tax bill. They're not having to come out of pocket for a big chunk of change. Instead, they'll be able to pay that at closing as part of their down payment. And that way they won't be hit with a big tax bill or won't have to have a substantial tax bill spread out along the life of the next year. And also the lender's not going to have to come out. So it's good on everyone's end. But that if you people wonder, hey, why are we paying so many months of taxes? Yes, it depends on when the closing actually happens. Then the aggregate adjustment, I mean, that's just federal requirements on how much this escrow account can start with. So a lender can't come and say, hey, up front, I need 14 months of homeowners insurance and 15 months of property taxes just to make sure we're covered. We'll cover you on the back end. They're not allowed to do that. So they're only allowed to collect exactly what they need. And if they collect a little bit more of what they need, like in this case, they really should only be collecting 2 months of homeowners insurance. They probably collected an additional month or 2 of property taxes. They'll do that in order to establish a cushion to make sure they have everything they need. If they do that, they have to credit the buyer back, so they're not coming out of pocket any additional than they should be. And then our fees, we do have a job to do, and we do them, and so we collect those fees. I'm not really going to go too much into that. Then anytime you get a loan, your lender's required to do a title insurance policy. They're going to require the buyer provide that title insurance policy to cover the lender's interest in the property. And then same then with owner's policy, I always recommend that the buyers get an owner's insurance policy. We've actually been getting more and more requests to not have a title insurance policy. If you have a client, ensure that they get a title policy because it's really cheap. Like this $446,000 is going to cover up to $475,000. So I mean, it's definitely worth it. And at the outset, it covers on what their down payment. So your down payment is covered immediately. Some of the cheapest insurance you can buy, and it covers it. And a lot of the potential issues it covers are somewhat remote, but like all insurance, you don't need it until you need it. And so want to make sure that and again, it's such a small part of the whole. There's really no reason to not do it. At this point, your client's just nickel and diming. If they don't put anything down, it's $26. $26 is the minimum amount. You're not willing to pay $26 either. Yeah. Have your clients get title insurance. Then recording fees, county charges $90 to record deed and deed of trust. If it's just a deed, that'll be $26. If it's like a down payment assistance loan and you're recording 2 deeds of trust, it'll be $154. So the more you record, the more that's going to be. The less you record, the less that's going to be. Pretty straightforward. And then you always prepay your first year homeowners insurance as well. So this one's a 1, 2, 3, 4. So they prepay that homeowners insurance, and people ask, whoa, why are we paying homeowners insurance twice? Well, the taxes you haven't paid yet. You got to get the home. You got to get the home insured. You have to get it on insurance enforced. So once the homeowners insurance, you say it's for a renewal. So when it comes back due again, that's when you're paying the homeowners insurance, as opposed to taxes. The taxes generally aren't due yet. So that's why they can't really collect taxes on it. And then that same analysis on the right-hand side, you've got all your outgoings, and that 328 on the credit side is going to include your loan amount plus everything that they are receiving credit. And then on the left side, you're going to see all of the costs of the loan, purchase price of the house, things like that. Subtract credits from debits, and that gives you that 165.0556. So that's pretty much the way that works. I like to go over this first because this is what I go over first, and this is just kind of how I operate, because I think this is a more user-friendly document because it's all localized on one side or the other side. Hey, this is your side. You just got to look at debits and credits. You won't have to refer back to other pages or anything like that. For me, it's easier, but other folks feel differently, and that's just I can't control how other people feel. All right. So, any questions on going through the altar or anything like that? All right, so we're moving on to the seller closing disclosure. Again, this is the government's form, not my form. So I can't claim to, I don't know why they structured it the way they did, but I did make sure that we did a dual lantern file on this one. So Wendell and Tricia handled this transaction last year. So the closing date on this one is, again, it's just going to list all the details with the file over on the left-hand side. Again, we did handle this transaction. So, I mean, really at this point, you're looking at a lot of the same stuff that I just went. These are all the you're going to see all the same numbers on the Alta that you're going to see on the settlement sheet, especially on the sales side. So this one, you're looking at all those same details. Up top, it's that credit, it's the debit side, credit side, and then on the bottom, you've got that credit side that you're looking at. But unfortunately, this is just structured in a way where you have to refer back. So the due from seller at closing, that closing cost paid at closing, you have to go to the next page in order to itemize all those closing costs. So when you do that, you'll just flip to that next page, but it still has your bottom line on the first page. So it's just, I don't know, to me, it's a little more clumsy in how that document is set up as opposed to how the Alta is set up, because you have to refer back and forth. So when you get to the next page, it does go through all of your basically what amounts go into that closing cost. And on the seller side, it's pretty basic. It's your commissions, it's your any fees that's charged by the attorney, any fees that's charged, any taxes you're paying, anything like that. However, on the first page, you've also got the tax proof. So it is, you're referring back and forth, back and forth. That's why I think this document's a little bit clumsy, a little bit clunky. But again, that's just, the government's a little bit clumsy and clunky sometimes. So that's just kind of where we're at. And then this third page, you just got, this is just acknowledge. Now, we typically have folks sign on the first page. There's some attorneys that'll have you sign on both pages 1 and 3. So on this one, you're just going through, again, it goes through a lot of information you already went through. It just has a little bit of information about your loan payoff, what those numbers are. I think this is kind of a useless page, but when people like people to sign it, it does show the proration of the HOAs, how that was arrived at. And then it's just got literally who's receiving commissions or what agency is receiving commissions. I think it's kind of a pointless page, like I said, but you know, I didn't create this document. Anybody have any questions on the seller CD? I think it is a little more user friendly than the buyer CD. I think the buyer CD is really clumsy and you go back and forth with it, but it is also the most important document for the buyer, so we got to use it. So I'm going to move on to the buyer closing disclosure. Excuse me. And so on this one, the top part is important because obviously it refers to all the details on your loan, refers to, again, all the information we've already referred to. It identifies the lender, identifies all the information for your loan term, 30 years. It should all, I mean, most transactions we do at this point are 30 years. Some folks will do 15, 20, 25, depends on what they've agreed to with their lender. Also, again, you've got a conventional loan here, so pretty straightforward. And it's, so you'll see right here, you've got your loan ID. That's the number, that's the loan number that the lender gives it. And then file number over here, that's our file number. So that's what those two numbers are if people ever ask. Now, first thing it goes through is your loan terms. I usually go through this on the promissory note. just because that's where you can go through all the details of the loan. This only has part of the details on the loan. So right here, you got your loan amount of 275, you got your interest rate. It gives you a principal and interest figure. That's almost never going to be, unless your folks don't have an escrow or they waive escrow, it's almost never going to be what that final payment is. So again, if you've done a closing with me, you know, the first thing I'll do is point folks to the 1693.25, because that's the number that folks are most interested in. What's my monthly payment? Well, first year, it's going to be 1693.25. That's going to include that principal and interest, plus your escrow for taxes and homeowners insurance, which again, people should know that that can change from year to year because taxes generally increase and homeowners insurance can increase, especially if your tax value your property. And then if there's mortgage insurance, that'll be on there as well. But really, I mean, prepayment penalty, no. Balloon payment, no. Generally speaking, again, if you're using this, if you're using a closing disclosure and it's TRID regulated, I have not really seen any TRID regulated loan as a prepayment penalty. I've not really seen any TRID regulated loan and as a balloon payment. I mean, generally, there's some commercial loans where you'll see a balloon payment attached, but generally speaking, I mean, you're not.
What do you call it? A regular, which?
TRID regulated.
Yeah.
So the TRID regulated, that's the TRID is the law that was put into effect and through the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. That was done in response to, that was put in place in 2012 in response to the crash of 2008, where people were not being regulated very well and people weren't being responsible handing out loans. I think that you can give a loan to a ham sandwich as long as they told you they made $100,000.
Did
So-
get a loan that actually had a prepayment penalty on it? I was very surprised,
Yeah.
but then it got sold and the new owner of the loan doesn't have that. That works, you know, but I had not seen that for
Yeah, you
many years.
rarely see a prepayment. So, but I typically see them more with like your hard money loans or.
It was a
stuff.
DSCR loan, maybe. That
Okay,
makes it different.
that
It was not.
yeah. And then, so you've got your escrow account here, and then I think this is confusing. I don't know why they structure it this way. It's got your estimated taxes, insurance, and assessments. And if you have an HOA, this 267.05 a month is going to be different from this 258.72, and that always throws off clients. Just make sure you point to these yeses and nos over here, because this 258.72 is going to be based upon what's in escrow. So just make sure you point them to that if they have any confusion there. And then your HOA dues per month is just going to be the difference between 267.05 and 258.72. So you can do a little quick math. Hey, it's going to cost you $8.50 a month to pay your HOA bills, which is why they bill it in. Then again, your closing costs, and that includes it talks about your loan costs associated with getting the loan, plus the other costs associated with the transaction. That's where they come up with that closing cost number. That's referred to on page 2. And then you've got your cash to close, and that's the other number that people are generally most concerned with. So they do make sure that that's on that first page. So any questions on the first page that I haven't on? All right, so the next document, this is where your closing costs are all itemized. So lenders do it differently. There's some lenders who will just put all their buyer paid stuff on here. Some lenders will include what's paid for by the seller if there's a seller credit, and they'll put it over on the seller paid side. Other lenders, which I think this lender has done, will just put the $2,000 on page 3. So sometimes the credit will show here and it won't show on the third page, and they'll do the reductions here. Other times the reductions are going to be on page 3 and it's just going to be done as a lump sum. It's just a lender preference as to how they do it. Both are acceptable. Both should be rather somewhat ascertainable, but this just lists on this one all of the buyer's costs that we've already gone through. So it's literally all the same stuff we went through on the Alta. That's the exact line that I will tell clients when I'm closing them. These are all the numbers we went through on the Alta, like this one less the $950 that's due from the seller, because again, it's a seller fee. So this just lists all those same numbers that I went through on the first document. I don't think anyone wants me to go through that again because I already spent quite a bit of time doing that. but it does add together. So your other costs, if they ask that, are generally going to be costs associated with putting the escrow account in place, paying your insurance, basically anything not related to getting the loan. That's what your other costs are. Add that for the loan costs, and that's how they get that total closing cost number. Any questions on that? Again, I've already gone. All right, this next page is you're calculating your cash to close up at the top. This is where I get to patch all on the back, whether it's your doing or not. And that's basically anytime I see that the cash to close that was estimated exceeds the cash to close of the final, I always say, yeah, thanks to your agent's really good work, you paid a lot less than you're supposed to. Sometimes that is attributable to you. Sometimes they might have paid like something that wasn't estimated to be paid, but if you negotiated a seller credit, I mean, yeah, that's something you did, so that's good. I will make no reference if the final number is higher than the loan estimate. I'll just kind of slide on past it. So don't worry, I got you covered. And then, so really the lender has to do this to show that they kept the buyer within some sort of reasonable estimate as to what they needed to bring in quick. Sometimes you'll see a credit and be like, hey, what's that for? You'll see these credits for $17, $35, things like that. That's the lender having to give a credit in order to make sure that the estimate they gave is within some sort of reasonable number, even if it's a very small number, that it has to be close enough to that loan estimate. And that's ultimately determined by their underwriting team and things like that. That it's not something I'm an expert at, but when you see those numbers, that's generally what that is. If it's an unexpected lender. Yeah.
Sometimes when the cash to close is different, we get it kind of confused as when we're gonna do the wire transfer. You know, and
Yeah.
because we need to know which one of the two we need to transfer.
So
And sometimes it's not that clear because they are both different.
so it's always this one on the right. It's always so you're always going to send the cash to close that's at the bottom of the first page. That's the whatever
The bottom of the first.
the bottom of the first page, and it's really whatever and the reason it can be different sometimes because the lender is required to send this document out 3 days prior to closing. If they sent, and that's just to be in compliance with government requirements, because to give the buyer some sort of indication of what they need to bring to close. But just because they sent out their final closing disclosure or their final preliminary closing disclosure, I should say, that doesn't mean that it's the final closing. There are times where they'll send that out and we haven't even received closing instructions yet on balancing the loan. And that's just because there are times they'll send that out and they say, hey, we're going to close in 3 days. Your buyer's not even completed closing. So they're still working on getting everything balanced. They're still working on getting their underwriting taken care of. They're just sending that out because they have to. So if your client doesn't have a clear to close and they get that document, let them know that's probably not going to be the final number because they're not going to come to us to balance the loan until they get a clear to close from their underwriter. They don't have a clear to close, they can't balance with us because they don't have all their approvals in place. There could be some things that still need to be cleared. So if they get that 3 day, the final prelim 3 days before closing, that's probably not going to be the number that they send. And so wait till they get something from the lender saying this is their final CD. Now there are going to be circumstances where the final CD may not be ready until an hour or 2 hours before closing. That's just the shifting nature of real estate. That's kind of the way, unfortunately, it is sometimes. And if that's the case, what we'll tell folks to do is say, ask your lender for a rough approximation. And if you can, send maybe $1,000 or $2,000 more than that, or just bring a check to closing. Now, we'll only accept a check in excess. We'll only accept a check for $500 if it's personal. We can't cover any more than that because we have to keep our trust account.
So if it's over the amount, the NIP law, a closing will have, by then, if it's all settled, then you cut the.
Yeah, if
person
it's
a
over
check
the amount,
back.
we'll just cut them a
Okay.
check back at closing or we'll wire it back to them, however. So because we've had people who wait till the last second to send their wire and their wire doesn't come through until after 4 o'clock. And then at that point, we're risking not being able to get on. So it's better if your client came, and I know there are some circumstances where your client's not going to be able to do that. That's okay. They might have to wait till the last second, but just know that if we don't have the funds, it's going to be difficult for us. And then going down the left side, a lot of times people look at the seller's transaction side. You can ignore that on the buyer CD. It's not going to be relevant. Generally speaking, these numbers either there are a few lenders that do require us to give this information on the final CD. Most don't. So some won't even fill it out. Others, it'll not be accurate, and you'll have this buyer saying, wow, this seller is getting $474,000 out of this transaction. Well, generally speaking, we haven't given them their payoffs. They don't need the loan payoffs for the seller. So it's not going to be accurate on the seller's transaction side. On the buyer's transaction side, but I tell folks section K is everything you're paying out. So if you're paying out your purchase price, you're paying out your closing costs, you're paying the HOA privilege. That's everything that's outgoing. Again, that's that debit number from the other document from the relative. And then what you paid or already, it says paid already or on behalf of borrower. That's the deposit they've already paid, the loan amount that they're signing a piece of paper for that amount of $275, the seller credit that they're receiving, due diligence they're receiving. So all the things we've already gone through. This is just the gross numbers of, hey, this is everything that's come out. This is everything that's going back in. And then finally, it leaves you with that credits minus debits number in order to square up that 165.05. That's how they arrive at that cash. So that's how they get there. And you'll see on the right-hand side, this lender didn't even require to give us anything on the seller. They didn't put anything in there. It's not required. You just sometimes see it. Sometimes it's inaccurate. Sometimes it's blank. Sometimes it's accurate. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just a preference from you. Any questions on the rest of this? All right. So moving on to page 4. So this is the page where people see this and they're like, oh gosh, do I have to explain this? I mean, no, not really. Really, this page is more about details of that we don't often discuss or have to discuss. When I go to get to this page, I say, this is a bunch of information that's either not relevant to your transaction or that we'll discuss during the course of the transaction. The assumption piece, this one is not assumable on its original terms because it's a conventional loan. Conventional loans aren't assumable. You have a government-backed loan, VA, FHA, USDA, those are going to be assumable, and you just have to get approval from the lender. I've actually got a whole nother presentation on assumptions that I can give some other time because assumptions may at some point soon be a thing. Your demand feature, pretty much any loan that you do with, again, a conventional or trade regulated loan is not going to have a demand feature. What a demand feature is the lender can say, all right, pay me the entirety of the note, regardless of whether you breached the loan or not, pay me the entirety of it. No loan that we deal with is. So it should always say does not have a demand feature. If it is checked that your loan has a demand feature and your client is not expecting that, you might want your client to call your lender and be like, hey, what's going on? Because that shouldn't be it. Late payment, you can explain. I mean, this is easily explained. You got a 15-day grace period on your payment. If you're after that, they're charging 4%. Most lenders charge 4. They have to charge 4 if it's over, or they have to charge 4 if it's under $300,000. If it's over $300,000, lenders can charge 5, and you will see some lenders, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, charge 5% on that rather than 4%, because they can, so they will. That's why Wells Fargo has such a good rate. All right, and you got your negative amortization. Again, this is something you're never going to see, but if someone asks you what it is, basically what negative amortization is normally how a loan amortizes over 30 years. You pay your loan, you pay your mortgage payment, it reduces your principal, and it goes, first part goes towards interest, the balance goes towards principal. What negative amortization is, it's, let's say your loan payment's $1,000, which includes $800 in interest, $200 in principal. You make a $300 payment, they will add whatever's left over that you didn't pay on interest to the principal. You're never going to see this because your lender's not going to allow partial payments. So because of that, that's what negative amortization is. You're just not going to see it. And then partial payments, same thing. There are some lenders that accept partial payments, other lenders don't. And and then what it says is the loan sold, your new lender can have a different policy. There's some lenders that do allow that bi-monthly payment where people can just pay every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. So if they allow that, then it'll say they might hold them in a separate account and pay the rest of the payment and then apply a full payment to the loan. This lender seems to not allow that. So most lenders are not going to say that they're going to accept payments that are less than the full amount due and apply them to the loan. You're just rarely going to see that. And finally, security interest. You're getting a loan, you're granting a security interest because they're going to make you sign a deed of trust, which is security interest on the property. So you can explain to them what that is. And then the right side just explains our escrow account. And it shows how much the escrow account is. It shows what the estimated escrow is over the first year. And it's generally going to say estimated because we don't know what that property tax is going to talk about before. And homeowners insurance can also change. And then your non-escrowed costs just talks about what the HOA dues are paying. So this is 4 cents short. Again, it's not necessarily going to be. And because it doesn't have to be. And then your initial because the escrowed HOA dues they're not escrowed. So the lender really doesn't have any sort of concern as to how much that actual amount is because they're not actually. Your initial escrow payment, that's the cushion that I was talking about before. And then that monthly escrow payment just shows what you're going to be paying. Again, it refers back to the first page, what you're paying each month toward your escrow on top of it. And if you don't have an escrow account, it'll just say that while you didn't get one, and you'll very rarely see that your lender doesn't offer. Most of the lenders we work with are always going to offer it. And then if there's anything that's not escrowed, then it would list it underneath that. That's not anything that we do. Any questions on this fourth page? And this last page at the top on the left side, this is kind of your truth in lending area. So the top part just talks about the total number of payments so if you make minimum payments for 30 years, that first number is what they're paying. That just is what it is. And the second number is what they're paying in interest. So the top number, total payments, second number, what they're paying in interest. I always use those two numbers to say, yeah, if you don't want to pay $526,000 for your $275,000 loan, then you got to make additional principal payments. That's what it is. And then the amount financed is just after you pay all your outstanding loan fees, everything like that, what amount of the loan is remaining and available to you after payment. Your APR, we always get a question on that. In this case, the rate is 4.75. What's the APR? I didn't get a 4.971, but APR is if you take all the loan fees that you paid up front, spread them out over the life of the loan, that's the rate on that money that you paid up, including the loan fees you paid up. And then your total interest percentage, the lower that number is, the better, because in this case, they're paying less than 100%. Pretty much all the loans we're seeing today, you're around 105, 110, seeing a couple 120. And the higher your rate is, obviously the more interest you're going to pay over your actual financing number. And then the right-hand side, that's required disclosures they have to make. They've already been made, these disclosures. They should have already received, they already signed the appraisal disclosure. They've already aware of what happens if you don't make payments, what constitutes default, things like that. And the liability after foreclosure, this is with respect to potential deficiency judgment. What that is, the lender forecloses and they can't recover the full amount that's due on the loan. They could technically file for a deficiency judgment, which means that they could file a lawsuit against the buyer to get the rest of what they're owed after foreclosure. State law might protect you from that. I'm not a foreclosure attorney. I'm not a bankruptcy attorney. They would need to talk to a bankruptcy attorney were they to get in that circumstance. I rarely see deficiency judgments that clients have to deal with. So that's why most will say that state law is generally good. Refinancing just says you can refinance because of course you can, and most folks are going to, hopefully in the next year or two. Hopefully rates go down a little bit. And your tax deductions, again, that just says what we're going to say. Consult a tax advisor for more information. And then we've just got your contact information for your lenders, for your agents, and oh, look who did this. Good job. And so this has got all the information for the folks associated who handle the transaction. And yeah, and then down at the bottom of that 5th page is where folks sign. I see you've got a question here or a comment question on the chat. So got Nelly asking a question, does a late payment, is that going to be deducted from the seller's credits? No, if there's a payment that's made late, then that's just going to be charged on the next statement that the buyer has. So they'll get that next statement from the lender, and the lender is going to say, okay, you're paying $1,500. Now you're paying $1,560 because you missed out. So that's where that's going to be. That's not going to affect the seller's credit. All right, so that is it. I've gone through 3 documents in pretty decent detail, I'd say. Does anybody have any questions or anything about any of the 3 documents that I just went? I know if you do, feel free to contact me afterwards if you don't want to raise your hand and shout it out. But I feel like I've covered that pretty decently well. But we're here for any questions that may exist. We got another here. No, that's not a seller's late payment. It's a buy. Sorry, I may have misread that. So if the seller has a late payment, and the seller is really not going to be making any sort of, we're not really concerned about the seller's payment or whether that's late at all. So any past due payments that the seller has are going to be taken care of by the seller's pay. So the seller's loan payoff, that's where their late payments are going to be taken into account. But the buyers don't have to take care of anything on the seller's behalf unless there's something in the contract where they say they will. But now the seller's payments are the seller's responsibility, buyer's payments are the buyer's. All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody for taking the time to come out here, and I hope even folks who have done this for a while were able to grab something positive and something useful from it. We do have lunch here. Sorry, folks on Zoom, you don't have access to that. But that's all that I have. So if anybody has any questions, again, please feel free to let me know. And I look forward to seeing y'all at the table. We'll talk to y'all soon. And I'm always available. Let me know. You're welcome.
Hey, Nick,
Yeah.
when you guys go back in the tax page, where the taxes being paid.
Yeah.
How far back do you go?
I mean, so we will go back as far as there's an unpaid.
Okay.
So if there's a tax bill that's unpaid from 2010, 2005, we'll go back and we'll require the seller to pay anything that's outstanding.
I ran into kind of going